Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a very special episode of the Adam Boyer Show. I am here. It's our second interview, first time ever with a candidate for the House of Delegates in Virginia's 51st House of Delegates district. It is Eric Zehr. Stick around. This is going to be a very interesting episode, an Independence Day special of the Adam Boyer Show.
In a world gone crazy, common sense, logic, and Christian values are needed. Adam Boyer is here to provide you all three in the Adam Boyer Show.
Okay, Eric, thank you for joining us on the show. I'm very excited about this, and it's a great pleasure to have you on. Starting off,
it's a pleasure to be here, Adam. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. We're going to start off with something very easy. A first question. I just want you to tell us a little bit about your background personally, your background in politics, and then why you decided to jump into the race for HD 51.
Adam, I'm a small business owner. I'm a father and a husband of 26 years, father of three grandchildren. And you asked why I got into this. Well, my background is growing up in the Mennonite church. There was an undercurrent that says you shouldn't be involved in civil affairs. And that didn't sit well as I read scripture and I saw where Christians are in fact supposed to be involved in taking on culture, and that is meaningful. And so it wasn't until I was in college and I was in Government 101 one day when we were talking about zoning, and the professor made the case that indeed Christians ought to be involved, and he even questioned whether zoning was okay or not. And we looked at it from a biblical lens, and so that kind of freed me up. I was excited, got involved, and I've been involved ever since.
And you were on the Board of Supervisors here in Campbell County 2013 to 17?
That's correct.
And then you were chairman of the Campbell County Republican Committee
for 2 years and chair of the Board of Supervisors for 1 year. That was sort of a rotational chairmanship.
Okay. Yeah, so you've had a lot of experience. This is not just, some random person jumping in, just because you like politics. You actually have experience in the nitty-gritty of it.
I've gotten a taste of what it's like to make a difference for people, to be able to stand up for the small guy, the regular Joe on the street, and be sort of an in-between, an intercessor between government, which at times can be heavy-handed, and the individual who usually just wants to live his life. He just wants to do his business and runs into bureaucracy.
Okay, so our first real question is, how would you say, and it kind of ties into what you're talking about, how would you say you distinguish yourself from the rest of the candidates in the field and make yourself the best man for the job? We have currently Matt Ferris, a former incumbent here, and he's running as an independent because he missed the filing deadline, so he's not going to be the nominee. Eric got the nominee. The Republicans here in the local committee, they really like him, and he's the nominee. We also have a Democrat in the district, Kimberly Moran. She's running and hoping that a vote gets split. And so, Eric, it's very important that we unify the party and get the vote. And so what would you say distinguishes yourself and makes you the best man for the job?
Well, Adam, the distinctives between myself and the Democrat are obvious. Just the antithesis couldn't be more clear. As far as anybody else in the conservative field, the difference is my 4 years on the Board of Supervisors, I fought for what I believed in. I've got experience with fighting to keep our bathrooms, boys and girls, in the school and in the county facilities. I've fought to protect children in social services from this new woke and transgender and in this whole leftist ideology. So I have a history of not only believing in something, but being willing to stand up and fight for it. And that's what we need in Richmond. We need guys that'll go down there and actually fight for what we believe in and push back. We've got to stop this woke mob. We've got to put an end to the devastation that they're wrecking in our society and on our children.
Yeah, I know on the Board of Supervisors, you had some tough votes where you were really the only conservative, maybe only one of one or two other members that had the nerve to vote against something that typically is accepted, but it didn't need to be voted for. I know there are a lot of those instances, and that's something a lot of people appreciate. So you talk about, not only wanting to do something, but actually going through with it, going through with what you believe. And so on that, what are your top legislative priorities if and when you do get into office?
Adam, can I go back and comment on something that you just
Yeah.
said?
Yeah,
You
go ahead.
mentioned that a lot of times, I would have been the lone vote, and oftentimes it might have started that way. But what I've found is people often are just looking for somebody to take the lead and say what they're thinking, which then confirms that what they were thinking was right to begin with. And I've found that to be a lot of what leadership is about, is being willing to speak what everybody else is thinking, call out the elephant in the room, and let's address it. So uh, back to your question, what are the top legislative agendas? Let me just start with the one that's on my mind at this very moment, and that is abortion. And I believe that life begins at conception, and that the most tyrannical thing that we can do is to give government the power to decide whose life is worth protecting and whose life is not worth
Yeah.
protecting. And so when we say, okay, government, you tell us at what age we should start protecting children, we've now basically
Hmm.
we've made Caesar into God. We've
Exactly.
given the government all the power of the sword, the power of choosing whose life to protect and who's not. So um, I am a life at conception guy, no exceptions. I believe we need to protect all children, but not only all children. When we start going down that slippery slope, we end up with euthanasia.
Yep. Something that's going on in
It's
Canada.
just the
Yep.
logical next conclusion. Like you said, we just look north of the border, and we
Hmm.
can see what's happening there. Where if you don't if you don't give priority and value to life at its beginning, you won't give priority and value to life toward the end either.
Exactly. There's been a lot of
So
stories up from the UK, even Canada, of people that are pretty much normally healthy, but they're told, they're depressed or whatever, and they're told might as well just end it instead of actually trying to find help. And that's a really big problem. So
that yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
we've got to be a culture that values life. We've got to be a culture that says you are worth everything, so that, like you said, people then uh, don't start to think of themselves as mere coincidences or mere accidents, or unworthy to be alive. So it's an entire culture that we're working toward. These legislative agendas are more than just laws and legislative agendas. This is about turning society. This is about helping people understand their value. This is about creating a culture of love, a culture of peace, a culture that looks after one another. And the whole woke thing is quite the opposite of that. That
Yeah.
teaches us that we should be looking for an oppressor, somebody to
Hmm.
blame for our problems, somebody to help us be the victim, instead of working together uh, and cooperating and valuing one another.
Yeah, I agree. And I know yeah, I want to say real quick before we get off the legislative priorities. I'm sorry, my voice is messing up a little bit. I'm still recovering from a cold, so that's for the viewer wondering, that's where the voice is coming from. Um, so that abortion's a big one. I know a lot of people in Virginia. Just before we get away from legislative priorities, a lot of people in Virginia are worried about the bill that was passed that ties us to California's energy bill. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank the Lord, Reggie has been done away with, and we've moved beyond that. But we've got to be paying attention to this, because if we had it as was actually law, that California bureaucrats were telling us, or were going to be telling us in the future, what we could and could not
Yeah, on the
do
opposite side of the country.
3,000 miles away, the land of fruits and nuts. And we're going to bring their ideology here into conservative Virginia? I think not.
Yeah,
We do not have the infrastructure for electric transportation, and it would have devastated our economy, Adam. We have the natural resources right here. We've got
yeah.
natural gas, we've got coal. These are things that we need to use. Taking good, careful stewardship over what's already here, and let's stay disconnected from California.
Okay, speaking with Eric Zehr, candidate for House District 51. And real quick, Eric, before we continue, if folks want more information about you beyond what they can get in this interview, where can they go to find you?
Online, zehrfordelegate.com. That's Zehr, the word for, FOR, delegate.com.
Gotcha. Okay, dope. So we're going to move on here into getting less of just specific bills and more issues broadly. So we've seen in recent years the divide between conservatives on the transgender issue, with a lot of mainstream conservatives wanting to stay out of it, just saying something we shouldn't be getting involved with. It's a culture war issue. So what's your stance on just transgenderism, the LGBTQ community just as a whole, and specifically all the mess going on in schools and with kids, because that's where a lot of this is kind of starting to gravitate toward, and how all this should be impacted legislatively, if at all.
Well, Adam, this has been a big issue right from the beginning of this campaign. It's been my goal to do what we can to protect children, and that's what this is really all about. I was at what's called a meet and greet in somebody's house the other night, and did not expect this to come up, but it came up as a mother told us the story about how her daughter was was sort of pulled, was sort of, I guess they call this grooming, where you encourage a child to question who they are, what they are. This girl was encouraged to start questioning whether she was really a girl, and ultimately was persuaded that no, she should be a boy. Well, that little girl is now in her 20s, and this mother, I had to listen to the story and look at her through her tears as she told about the devastation this has wrought for her little girl. So, this is not the first story that I've heard about this either. These things are rubber meets the road. They're at home, they're in our homes, they're in our communities. These are real life stories where children are being their lives ruined, really. Uh, this is not the sort of ideas, these are not the sort of ideas we should be planting in children's minds.
Mm-hmm.
Children need to be affirmed that they are good and valuable the way that they're created. We should not be telling them there's something wrong with them and therefore they should follow our agenda or our social re-engineering plan, uh, and basically sacrifice these children for that plan. That's wrong. We on the right are told that we're the ones who are supposedly unkind or uncaring, unaffirming, but there's nothing more deadly, dangerous, and harmful and abusive to a child than to tell that child there's something wrong with them just the way that they are.
Yeah.
So, as far as legislation goes, we need to get parents back in charge. Parents need to be in the know. If this is happening to their child at school, parents need to be told. Parents need to be not only told, but parents need a seat at the table. And that seat at the table needs to be the chairman's seat, not just another voice. But
Mm-hmm.
children belong to parents. Children do not belong to the state. And parents need to be empowered. Parents need to be put in the place of deciding for themselves and for their children what's in the best interest of their children. There's nobody who loves children more than parents.
Yeah.
And even just looking at natural law says you don't have children unless you have parents. Natural law also says and shows us there's no one who's more concerned for the welfare, the long-term welfare of those children than their parents.
Yeah, and certainly no one that knows better.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
We have some nutty parents,
Yeah.
but there are, by and large, those are some rare exceptions.
Yeah. And that's actually the perfect segue into question 5 I have here. So one thing that's on a lot of people's minds is the issue of school choice. So that goes right back into what you're talking about. So what's your stance on that, on school choice? And I know you've told me before you have some specific plans on how to implement it. How would you go about actually getting it done legislatively, especially since right now the legislature in Virginia here is split between the Democrats controlling the Senate, the Republicans control the House of Delegates. We are looking forward to this November, hopefully, when Eric gets elected. We hold the House, take back the Senate. We already have Governor Youngkin in here in Virginia. That would give us um, control. We only need to flip. We only need to flip 2 seats in the Senate. That ties us, and then Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears on our side has the tie-breaking vote. Obviously, we'd like to get more, but let's just assume things don't go our way this election. We hold the House, but we don't get the Senate. Obviously, we're still in at governor because that's not up this year. So if the legislature stays split, what how do you want to go about getting school choice implemented legislatively?
Excellent question, Adam. Let me reterm it. Instead of school choice, let me term it educational freedom.
I
Because
like it.
primarily we need to, number one, protect the freedoms that parents already have. A lot of parents already have the freedom, the ability to educate at home, to educate in private schools, to educate through co-ops. There's a lot of options. We need to make sure that whatever we do, we don't endanger those options. But we also already have in Virginia what's called the education, I believe it's the Education Tax Credit Program. Don't quote me on the title of it, but there is a tax credit program that
Yeah.
enables business owners and individuals to put money into what's called an SGO. This is a scholarship granting organization. The money never actually goes all the way up to the state. So there's no bureaucratic hands that touch this money. There's no loss of money to red tape and whatnot. It goes directly to that scholarship granting organization, and then private schools can petition and get scholarships for children in their schools. That program needs to be expanded. The beauty,
Okay.
again, the beauty of this program is it keeps private money for, for education. It's not money
Yeah.
coming down from government. Anytime money comes down from government, you can expect there's going to be strings
Yep.
attached. If not this year, there will be strings attached next year or sometime in the future. So let's expand that program, keep the money out of the state, and make it available for parents to teach their, or to at least choose where their own children will go to school.
Yeah. That's a very unique perspective. You don't really hear a lot of conservatives talking about the specifics, how they want to get things done in general, but especially on the school choice issue. It's much more of just a kind of a campaigning tactic. So it's really good to hear that you have an exact plan for how to do it. So another big issue that a lot of Republicans in Virginia would like to see passed is a constitutional carry bill. That's what it's being called. I believe about 25 states have a constitutional carry bill currently, or some version of it. The best versions of it effectively mean that anyone 18 or older, so a legal adult, can carry a pistol anywhere and any time and any way they choose. So it can be open or concealed, and there's anywhere in the state for the most part. And so, are you a supporter of this, and or would you want a different version of this? And if so, how would you work to get this passed? Again, considering right now we're working with a split government.
Adam, I think a lot of our problems in this, not only in this Commonwealth, but also in the federal government, would be solved if we stuck with our Constitution. Our forefathers knew what they were doing. They gave us a beautiful document. If we stuck by that document, which says shall not be infringed, we would be in a lot better place. And so that needs to be our goal, is to get back to the words in that document, shall not be infringed, and not have and create further steps for people to go through to be able to protect themselves and those that they love.
Yeah, I'm guessing because we know right now with the Democrats controlling 2 seats in the Senate, and I know so far this year a lot of the more moderate Democrats, such as Chat Peterson, I think up in Northern Virginia, he got primaried by a much more crazy run of the mill now Democrat, and so even some of the more reasonable moderate Democrats are gone. So it is gonna be hard to work with the other side, especially on something like constitutional carry. So how would you think maybe you could work on getting that passed? Maybe by putting something else in the bill, giving the Democrats, I don't want to say conceding to them, but finding some middle ground to where we each get something we want, maybe.
Well, Adam, I think number one is having the ideal, the goal, the ultimate target, no pun intended,
Yeah.
in mind, and that is constitutional carry, getting back to what our forefathers envisioned. And so, as we work, whether it's with Democrats or whether we work with those within our own party, we've got to remember that the American people were given this freedom by our founding fathers. But I would take it a step further. It's not just a freedom given by our founding fathers, but it's a God given freedom. We are, as uh, as heads of household or as parents or in whatever capacity, we're always to look after those in our family. We're to protect our neighbors. The sixth commandment says, "Thou shalt not murder." Well, the flip side of that is that requires that I do what I can to protect innocent life.
Yeah.
I need to be able to do that. And if my ability is stripped away by limiting me to my bare hands,
Yeah.
I'm not able to protect those that I love. I'm not able to protect those that I'm required to protect. So
Yeah, the craziest thing, it always goes back to in gun control, the argument. The the thing that always strikes me is how they just completely ignore the fact that if criminals are willing, they're gonna go out and murder someone, why would they stop at a law that says they can't own a gun? It's ridiculous. We're not going to ban all the guns. There's a register. There's upwards of 400 million guns in the United States. Even if we passed a law today, the federal government passed a law, no one can buy or purchase a gun anymore, anything like that in any state, anywhere, anytime. There's still 400 million guns out there in the hands of law abiding gun owners, but also in the hands of those who we don't want to have them. So even as a law as harsh and comprehensive as that is not going to take care of it. So I think it's a bit of a paradox
and
almost.
Adam, even if you could disarm everybody, say you could pull all those 400 million guns back in, and they're no longer in circulation, criminals are going to find weapons. And I was reading or hearing a story on the news about um, over in the UK, for example, the incidence of murder by knife is higher than it is here because criminals are going to they're going
Yeah.
to get their hands on what they need. So, are we willing to outlaw kitchen knives, baseball bats, lead pipes, you name it?
Yeah.
I mean, people are creative. Murder was around long before guns were around.
Yeah, I mean, heck, you can use a rock. I mean, it's not difficult to find something. I mean, yeah, it's the logic does not follow. There's a very tough line of logic to follow if you're gonna try to make that argument because logic really is not on your side if you're a proponent of gun control. So moving on, one of the things, obviously a hot topic again, especially in Virginia, which is a swing state. What's your opinion on the way elections should be conducted in Virginia overall broadly, but particularly since you're a delegate here in Virginia, or will be hopefully come November, specifically in Virginia? And for instance, just as an example, should mail-in balloting be allowed at any stage of the process?
Adam, we're at a place right now where I've heard the statistic that 50% of Americans trust. That means 50% distrust our balloting system. So that's unacceptable. We have to get to a place where 100% of Americans trust our balloting system. And if that requires reeling it all back in and going back to election day, not election season,
Yeah.
with auditable ballots, that's what we need to do. We need to get back to a place where the American people trust this system. And if there's a question, we can go back and we can actually look at those ballots. We can actually make sure that each ballot was cast by somebody who was supposed to be voting
Yeah.
and only voting once, and not, not
Making sure they're
duplicates.
alive. Yeah.
And
Making
yeah,
sure
we
they're
want
alive first.
dead people should not be voting.
That's
Yes,
true.
this is true.
Dead
So,
people don't quite have the mental capacity to be voting.
right.
Um, yeah. So I think one of the things a lot of people will say with mail-in balloting is, well, look at all the voting that happened in 2020. More people voted in the presidential election than ever before. It isn't that great. And my answer to that is actually the main liberal argument is always you don't want people to vote, and like a lot of the time, yeah, I don't want random Joe out in the street necessarily just voting. A lot of the people today, especially, yes, I shame to say my generation, Gen Z and younger, they are not they are not educated enough to be voting on decisions correctly, and they're not going to be getting up, standing in line, going to the polls on election day if it requires any effort. The reason Democrats made it so easy in 2020 was because generally the less motivated voters are the Democrats, not the Republicans. The Republicans tend to be very more motivated. And if they could make it easy just to mail your vote, get up, walk outside the mailbox, drop it, there you go, you just voted. Or in some cases, ballot harvesting is legal now in some states. A political operative from any campaign can walk up to the door, hand you a ballot, you can fill it right out, and they'll say they'll take it right back for you. And sometimes they don't mess with it, but it's so much more opportunity for fraud, and people just buy it. And so my answer is no. If you don't care enough to go stand in line on election day. And no, never consistently in our nation's history, anytime has anyone ever had to stand in line for 6 hours on an election day in blistering heat. That doesn't happen. On the rare occasion, sure, but for the most part, stuff like that doesn't happen. And if you're not willing to go and stand in line for 30 minutes to an hour to vote for the candidate, use that time to do research on the candidates. If you're not willing to do that, I don't want you voting.
Adam, the sacrifices that were made to enable us to vote were immense. They were huge sacrifices compared to going and just walking into a building and casting a vote. So we need to be we need to remember those sacrifices that were made to enable us, to give us that privilege of being able to vote. And so, like you were saying, if you're not willing to make a little effort to go and cast a vote, then maybe you ought not be voting. If you care so little that you won't go down to the ballot or the polling place and cast your vote,
Yeah.
maybe you ought to just stay at home anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. That's my thinking. So finally, before I let you go, I know you've got stuff to get to. So before I let you go, I gotta ask, what do you think the outcome of this year's elections in Virginia is going to be? A lot of people, they don't think of this being an election year, 2023, because I think Virginia and New Jersey are the only states that have off-year elections here in 2023. But because Virginia has some sort of elections every year, this year the Senate and the House both up for grabs. So how do you see it shaking out in November?
Adam, I'm an optimist. I believe the Republicans are going to hold the House of Delegates and we're going to take the Senate. And
Okay.
that is what's got to happen because right now there is a razor thin majority in the House of Delegates. But what I think is working in our favor is the left is coming unmasked. They are showing their hands. People are seeing what they're really about. They're seeing the result of this leftist agenda as they've worked to uh, to try to convince people that they shouldn't be proud of our country. In fact, we should be proud of our country. We should be grateful for what we have here. We have a perhaps the best civilization, the freest, the most productive civilization,
Mm-hmm.
the most generous society that history has ever shown. We need to be proud of that. And the left is telling us, no, we need to throw this all away, that this
Dismantle it.
somehow, this is just a wrong sort of society we've created. Um, what they're doing to our children, what they're doing to our school system, what they're doing to order through law enforcement. Um, the left is really showing its hand. I think people are waking up to that and they're not willing to support that sort of agenda anymore. And they're realizing that what the Republicans have to offer is a much better approach.
Yep. Well, I've been talking here with candidate for Virginia, House of Delegates, District 51, Republican nominee, Eric Zehr. Eric, one last time, the audience, you're excited, you want to donate to the campaign, you want to get involved, volunteer, host an event, come meet Eric. What do they do? Where do they go to find you?
Go online, zehrfordelegate.com. That's Zehr, the word for FOR, delegate.com.
And that will be linked, whether you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, wherever, in the show notes. That will be linked so you can find Eric. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
It's been a pleasure, Adam.